Can we communicate to our kids that we are well pleased by you and that you are beloved, regardless of what you accomplish, right? No matter, before you do anything to advance in academics or athletics or performing arts, like, you are loved and cherished for who you are. And let that be the thing that guides our parenting.
Welcome to Teach Your Children Well, a podcast on parenting in the way of Jesus. I'm Sarah Cowan Johnson, and here we explore how the biblical story offers wisdom and good news for the 21st century parent. Today, we're talking about how to help our kids and teens discover their unique, God-given passions, talents, and abilities without burning them out. Kids today are under so much pressure. And as a parent, I'm sure you are already aware of this. They're juggling nonstop extracurriculars, year-round sports, classes, and tutoring, while we scramble to keep up with their packed schedules. Many of us believe that getting our child into a top college is the key to their future happiness, even though research actually says otherwise. And here's a heartbreaking statistic from a recent study. 1 in 4 teens interviewed said they feel like their parents love them more when they succeed. We call this achievement culture, and the consequences are real. Stress injuries in youth sports are skyrocketing, teen mental health is declining, and all this stress can actually lead to substance abuse problems. Some experts now place high-achieving students in the same high-risk category as kids living in poverty or in the foster care system. So how do we resist achievement culture and guide our kids forward in life in a healthier, more God-honoring way? Well, I'm excited to talk about it today with my guests, Rob and Amy Dixon. Dr. Rob Dixon is the author of Together in Ministry, Women and Men in Flourishing Partnerships. In addition to serving on InterVarsity staff for more than 26 years, Rob teaches at Fuller Theological Seminary and Fresno Pacific University. Amy Dixon is the author of 3 picture books, as well as a middle grade novel. When she's not writing, she is editing and marketing other people's books. The Dixons have recently co-authored a children's book called Penny Preaches, which I cannot wait to talk to them about today. They have 4 children, and they live in California. So welcome, Amy and Rob, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Well, before we dive in, I would love for our listeners to get to know you both a bit. So I'm wondering if you could tell us how you met, how long you've been married, and just a little bit about your family to start off.
Yeah, we both went to Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. And we met in the dorms. We're both super involved with InterVarsity, Christian Fellowship. By the end of my second year, we started dating. And we dated for a few years and got married. And now we've been, I forgot to do the math. Rob.
I think it'll be 28 years this summer. Pretty good. And we have 4 kids. So our oldest is Josh, and he just graduated about a year ago. He graduated from Fresno State University. So he's now looking at master's programs. Our next oldest is Lucy, and she is a junior at UC Santa Barbara. And then our daughter Gracie is a freshman at UCLA. And then we have one still at home. So we are like on the horizon of empty nesting. Lily gets a lot of her parents' time, whether that's for good or for ill, who knows? But she's a sophomore at the high school by our house.
All right. So in your experience as parents and also in your work, you've worked with young adults and college students. Where have you seen achievement culture at play? How have you observed the pressure that kids and teens are facing to achieve and excel?
First of all, we live in a city, in a context where achievement culture is really strong. It feels comprehensive. It feels kind of relentless. And we've raised our kids in that context. Just for a little bit of background for your listeners, like our schools in our town, the school district is like the crown jewel. It is the end all be all. It's why people move here. It's why people stay here. And everything it's a well-funded district, and everything is high bar. Like whether you're talking about athletics or academics or performing arts or just any of the different features that a school would provide up and down, all the way from kindergarten up to the top. It's comprehensive. And maybe I'll tell a story that kind of the first time we experienced this achievement culture. So our son Josh was, I think, under 8 soccer. It was U8 soccer. And it was his first ever soccer attempt, right? And we signed him up for the team and he's going to practice. He doesn't know much about the game, but we're there on the sidelines as committed parents wanting to cheer on our kid. And a parent makes sort of sidebar conversation with us, small talk. And she says something like, is soccer going to be Joshua's sport? And we're like, I mean, maybe. He could barely tie his shoes. Like, I mean, maybe. And then she said something like, I'm going to paraphrase it, but she said something like, you probably need to decide that soon, because, and then the next line is what sort of I'll never forget. She said, if he wants to make the varsity team at the high school. Right. And there was this moment of like, holy cow, like this is serious for her. And that was at the very beginning. And since then, we've just gone on to realize, like, whether it's sports or the other contexts, it is just this built-in relentless drive to hit the top mark, the varsity team at the high school, right? So all the things that go into that: club soccer, not just any club, the best club, not just any team in the best club, but the best team in the best club, and then private lessons and all of that, right, is what was behind that comment for her. So yeah, achievement culture alive and well here.
Yeah. And another example, I would say, just recently, our daughter, who's 16 at the high school, said she's involved in the theater program. And she kind of she was sort of kidding, but kind of mad at me. Like, why didn't you put us in dance? Like, how come I'm not a dancer? I wish I was a dancer. And I'm looking at her like, you can still be a dancer. But it was, to her, it was like at the ripe old age of 16, if she hadn't already been dancing, she could never be a dancer. And I was like, this is such a weird like frame of mind, but that's really how it is where we live.
You are articulating it perfectly and painfully. And so, yeah, you have seen it and you've experienced it, and so have your kids. So where do you think this pressure comes from? Like, what's at the root of it?
There's some level, I mean, I'll use the word fear. There's fear, that by not, will the kids have the opportunities that the other kids will have? Will they be successful? Will they be on top of their game? Will there be, and so it just drives that kind of from the beginning. Like, if we don't want to end up where we don't want to end up, what do we need to do to mitigate that? Right. And so it's just driven by a lot of fear. And maybe one other element of it for me is, I think there is, if I'm going to be honest, like a fear of like, how will their achievement or not reflect on my parenting, reflect on me as a dad, right? So there's probably some of that in there too. So those two levels probably of fear.
I think too, like a protectiveness. So you want your child to be accepted, to have their group, to belong, all of these things. So it's this protectiveness of your child thinking, well, I don't want them to be left behind. If all of their friends are doing this one thing, if these are her people, then, you want her to also be with them, or you don't want them to be left behind or left out. I would say for me, definitely those years of the kids in kind of elementary, middle school were as much of like keeping up with the Joneses as I ever felt like, well, these people are doing these things. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Like, what are the right choices to make for really what you think is the health and well-being of your child? But I mean, we have some stories about how, it was to the detriment of their health and well-being, choose some of these choices. But yes, it's definitely like a protective thing too for your kids.
Yeah, so both there is a good desire and sort of the fear motivation. Both of those things kind of create this drive. And yeah, I know how difficult it is to kind of go cut against the grain there. I remember when all of the neighborhood kids were doing t-ball on Saturday mornings. They were really little, and my kids had no interest in t-ball. And I'm like, oh, should I sign my kid up for t-ball? All the other kids are doing it, but I'm like, my Saturday mornings are so precious. I'm sorry, I'm not doing this. But you have that that moment of like, oh, they're going to miss out. I'm holding him back from his future baseball career. So let's talk about the messages that parents are absorbing from secular culture about what it means to launch our kids into the world. So how does 21st century Western culture define, like, what's the goal of parenting? You guys have launched some kids into college. What would secular culture say is the goal? And then what's your role? What do parents see as their role in that process?
Yeah, Rob and I were just talking about this even before this interview, because we were talking about sort of what our parents believed, which was that we needed to have a job, stability. Like their goal for us was that we would do better than they did, whether that's, financially. I mean, financially, certainly. And I think a lot of parents still feel this way. It's that sort of American dream type thing where you're looking for what success looks on the outside. So it's financial success and stability. It's relational success. Maybe that means getting married and having children. So there's still kind of that white picket fence mentality that I think drives a lot of families for sure.
Yeah, there's this sense that these certain things, so success, financial, whatever, relational, that also equals happiness too, right? Like there's no narrative that says that joy or happiness can be found apart from those things.
I don't know if it's helpful to make a distinction, Sarah, but I was thinking about this. Like, I don't think there's a problem with achieving as a process, and we should want to do our best and all of that. And I think we've tried to teach our kids, like, you work hard and good things will happen, and that's kind of the way things tend to go. Not always, but it's where it becomes like an idol almost. I'll use that word. Like it's where it becomes the end all be all, and the thing that you're chasing is the thing that dominates your world and governs how you respond to things, and it gets in the way of pursuing a life with Jesus in some ways, right? That's what idols do. And so I think maybe I just make that distinction. I don't think there's anything wrong with encouraging the kids to achieve. It's more, how do we talk about the end goal, and how does that drive the process, and our values there?
Yeah, I love that distinction. And yeah, so what have you noticed about the impact of when that achievement becomes an idol, and when it, under 8, they're thinking about the varsity team, right? What's the impact of that messaging on kids? What is that narrative teaching kids about their value, their identity?
Yeah, I mean, I think their identity really becomes wrapped up in that. Just as it becomes about what they can produce for whatever that thing is. I'm thinking in particular about one of our daughters who was so in love with volleyball, and she wanted to, and volleyball had been my sport growing up. So when she fell in love with volleyball, I just thought that all my dreams and prayers were answered. We were going to get to be this volleyball family, but she was on a team and in a program where it was very like, you got put on the court, and and this was at 10, 11 years old, like this is very young. If you made a mistake, you were pulled off the court. So there wasn't freedom to fail in that for her. And so her identity became very wrapped up in what she produced on the court or didn't produce equaled her value. And so that was a really hard dynamic. And I know that there are things that she learned from that and that were really good growth things for her. But I think that was a hard thing for her to overcome, being in that sport for so many years and having that type of coaching. So yeah, I think that does happen for a lot of kids.
Yeah, it's heavy, right? I mean, it almost feels like, they have their school backpacks, which it's almost like they also have this additional invisible backpack, which is like the psychic weight of like expectations and perceptions, and like this, like what Amy said, like this, who am I apart from what I produce, that starts so early. It's too big of a burden. I mean, I carry that burden now. I'm 52, but like, I just can't imagine, Lucy at 12 or whatever, trying to carry that extra backpack around. And so I think it does, it challenges the mental health, it challenges her self-worth, perception, it challenges all of those things. And the toxicity of that, I think, has been something we've been trying as parents to like mitigate. Yeah, deal with that.
Wow. Yeah, that's a powerful image. That's going to stay with me for a while. So in light of the story here that you're describing, right, this narrative, we really need an alternative vision. And so I would love for you to share just your view of the biblical story around calling and gifts, spiritual gifts. How is the biblical story good news for parents and kids here?
One of the passages that we've appreciated over the years comes out of the book of Mark, and it's right at the beginning of the story where Jesus is baptized in the Jordan by John the Baptist. And there's this moment where there's the voice from heaven comes and says, "You are my beloved son, with you I am well pleased," I think is what the text says, right? And I think what's significant to as Amy and I have talked about that passage is that's before Jesus has done anything. He hasn't healed anyone. He hasn't cast out demons. He's just there, and I think about that as a paradigm for this new narrative you're talking about, Sarah. Like, can we communicate to our kids that we are well pleased by you and that you are beloved, regardless of what you accomplish, right? No matter, before you do anything to advance in academics or athletics or performing arts, like you are loved and cherished for who you are. And let that be the thing that guides our parenting. And so that's one, in terms of how we talked about or how we've thought about our parenting, I hope, and we're not perfect, but I hope we've managed to kind of give that perspective to the kids, right? That it's not about the GPA or the personal best in the high jump or whatever. It's about who you are and how loved you are in this environment by Jesus and by your parents.
I think for us too, sort of how that plays out is being people who encourage them to find their passion or their purpose versus, we were talking about how when we were in college, there was a lot of pressure to know what your job or your profession was going to be. Whereas it's funny because our kids we've sort of swapped roles. Like our kids are like, but I don't know what my job's going to be. And Rob and I are like, that's fine. Like, you don't need to know that right now. Because for us, it's college. That experience is not as much about securing a profession, but it's about discovering what you're passionate about and kind of how God has created you to care about things in this world. Just an example is one of our daughters is a political science major, and she has really discovered that she has this passion for organizing and empowering people with information. So she does things I would never have wanted to do as a 20-year-old. She has these tables and she gives people information about different issues that she's working on. And she loves just talking to people and saying oh, you didn't know that you could do this? Let me walk you through the steps of exactly how to get registered to vote. But this is this amazing she door knocks. She goes on she has some pretty funny stories actually of people engaging with her at their homes. Yeah, super bold, but it's I don't know if that's going to turn into a job for her, but I don't really care that much, to be honest. It's just really cool being able to see her find the thing that really makes her tick and that the thing that we think is really what God has put her on earth for. So it's cool to kind of watch them develop in that way and to be there to encourage it when we see those things happening.
When you are living into that biblical narrative as a parent, when you're living from a place of blessing, you're parenting from a place of blessing, and when you're parenting from a place of not, looking for the job as the outcome, but the passion and the giftedness of the outcome, how does that shape your view? How would you describe? So what's the role of the parent in launching your kids? How does that shape how you think about yourselves?
Part of my job as a parent is helping the kids discern how God has wired them, the gifts God's given them. It's like a treasure hunt almost. And so let's try some things, right? And let's experiment and be free to fail. And we're going to learn as we go. And who you are and who you're meant to be is going to become clear over time. And there's a process for that, right? And it may take longer than your friends, and it may take longer than culture says it should. But that's the goal, is to understand how God's wired you and how God would want to use you, right? So I like that. Again, listeners, we don't get this right all the time. Just caveat, right? Caveat there. But in my best days, I think in our best days as parents, that's the posture, right? Is like, let's help you sift and discern, who you are and how God's made you.
Yeah, and I think just to go off of that too, like I think part of the reason why we can speak to some of this is because we have learned through failure. So our kids, they're not completely grown and out in the world and having their own families yet, but I think that we did make some choices along the way that were very achievement or keeping up with the Joneses based, and we kind of saw the like, oh, I don't really like where that took us. So we've been able to kind of look back and reflect and say, maybe that wasn't the best thing. I will say another thing that you can do is just as you observe the things that your kids lean towards or experiences they have, you can help them process those and reframe them as well. We always talk about how another one of our daughters, this poor girl, she got called bossy so much when she was little, but we were able to help her reframe that. She really has these amazing leadership skills, and when she speaks, people really listen. And even from a young age, that's what was going on there. And so helping her kind of reframe those experiences to like, okay, no, these are actually leadership skills, and this is how we're going to help you like develop those. So yeah, so you can observe those kinds of things.
So important. And with that particular example, it's not just even skills. It's like these are leadership gifts that we believe God has put in you. And the world's going to interpret that through this lens. But with our lens, like this is the beginning of maybe a spiritual gift, in addition to skills. That's awesome.
Sarah, I mean, like in Grace, Amy's talking about Grace, she's going to encounter more headwind in her leadership as a woman, right? Like in culture and society. And so like, I'm hoping that what we've done in helping her reframe the experience with some, pardon my goober of a fifth grader who made some bossy comment about it, we're hoping we're developing muscles in her that will carry her forward when she enters the workforce and somebody mansplains her or whatever, marginalizes her in some way in the workplace, right? So there's a longer term trajectory we're thinking about or trying to think about here.
Oh, totally. What a gift. And that's actually a great segue because I want to talk about your book, Penny Preaches. So our 2-year-old niece is living with us right now. And so this has become a regular in our bedtime story routine. I love it. I wish I had this book as a child, especially as someone who spent some years as Pastor Sarah, actually. I had never seen a woman leading a church service till I was in my 30s. And so this book, anyway, I'm not going to talk about it. I want you to talk about it. But could you tell us, first of all, just a little bit about what the book is about?
So Penny's a little girl who loves going to church and being a part of the church service. And in particular, she loves watching the sermon or listening to the sermon. And so she has this moment where she thinks maybe I could become someone that preaches and delivers a sermon. And then she goes through this process of trying to hear from God, and there's internal barriers and there's external barriers. And then Pastor Sarah arrives and gives her a model for what it looks like to exercise leadership in that way. And so, I mean, it's funny to hear you say that, Sarah, like I wish I had this book when I was younger, because we've heard that a lot. And so our hope is really that the book changes culture in the church and opens the door for more girls to consider whether or not God might have put into them a teaching gift or any other gift that generally doesn't fit the trajectory that women so often are kind of invited into. So yeah, to use your gifts however God's called you.
Yeah, the importance of women or girls and women, seeing images of leadership that reflect who they are. That's huge. I'll never forget when I was a pastor, there was a little girl who, for career day, they had to dress up for, whatever career, and her dad sent me a picture and it said she wore her best Pastor Sarah outfit. And because that's the thing. It's like, yeah, I didn't have those models. I grew up in a denomination that affirmed women, ordained women, but I didn't see it until I was older. So that's beautiful. So how would you say, specifically for girls even, but how does Penny Preaches illustrate the biblical narrative around calling and gifts that we were discussing earlier?
We're trying to express the idea that everyone is given gifts, good gifts from God, and that our obligation, but our joyful responsibility is to discern what those are and to use them to advance God's kingdom. I mean, we need all hands on deck to advance God's mission, to fulfill the Great Commission from Matthew 28, right? So I think it really is about like, yeah, how can we discern that and be intentional about that? Like we talked about earlier with the kids, like it's a treasure hunt. Like, who are you? How's God made you? And what a fun experience to like try to sift that together, learning by doing and all of that. And so I think that's Penny's journey, is like understanding who she is. And we need a sequel or two, Aim, so we can like tell the story, what happens beyond her meeting with Pastor Sarah. But yeah, that's the gist of it.
Yeah. And we do, yes, we've talked about like models, like the importance of models, I think is really great. But I think also her parents' role in this book is just kind of observing what's going on around them and in her. And yeah, and then taking action as a result of that, like giving her opportunities to see those models.
How would you, if you could say a little bit more about that, like what is the role of that the parent can play in, that's sort of the treasure hunt. So what are some of the specific actions that a parent can do as they begin to notice, oh, my child is wired this way?
Remember one time we took the kids, all four of them, to Costa Rica for just a short-term summer experience. And part of our thinking on doing that was to just give them a sense, A, that the world is more than what they experience day in, day out in our town, right? So to give them a global perspective. But then B was there was all these ministry sites, and we just wanted the kids to try stuff out, right? And so I think that's part of it. It's like creating opportunities for kids to understand what they're good at, what they're not good at, what gets them out of bed in the morning, what doesn't, right? So a couple of our kids are like working with children in like the tutoring club was like, yes, awesome. They could do that. And some of our kids were like, how soon till we're done here? And I think part of that was it's just data, right? That you're gathering as a parent and opening the door to like understanding how they're wired and who they are, right? So part of it is experience. And then I think like back to the modeling thing, it's like exposure to all these different kinds of opportunities and examples, and then opening the question of like, well, can you see yourself doing this? Is this something that would be fun for you? And kind of having that debrief conversation.
I think our kids would say to a fault, talk about everything. Sometimes our kids are like, do we have to talk about this? Well, yes, like you brought it up, so let's talk about it, or you wanted to watch that show, so let's all watch it together and talk about it. I think you can see it in your kids when they get excited talking about something. And I think those are the kinds of things that we have to take note of.
What are your hopes for Penny Preaches? Just give us, what you hope this book accomplishes.
It's interesting because I think when we wrote it, and I think Rob already said this, that we're hoping to see the culture of churches change, to have this be normalized for women in visible leadership positions to be the norm. It is interesting, though, because I feel like what I've seen God doing with this book is a little different. I think that it is bringing a little bit of healing to women who have experienced pain in the church around their giftedness and their giftedness not being seen or recognized or valued. So it's sort of interesting because I think what we set out to do, it would be great. It would be great if this became normalized. But I really love what I'm seeing God do through it. And a lot of the work that I'm seeing is in adults. So it's interesting.
That is probably an unexpected kind of turn of events. It's almost like as you're talking, I'm imagining, it's like little girls are reading this book and the inner child of a lot of adult women are reading this book as well. So that's beautiful.
One of my favorite experiences with the book is we were at a conference and we were doing like a signing, and we had some copies, and we just kept seeing like grandma types coming and just buying it like crazy because they had been on the front end of sort of fighting these battles in the church for access and agency. And they saw Penny as a tool to use in investing in their granddaughters and their grandsons. And so that was kind of a cool thing too, just in addition to what Amy's saying, like this idea that a family could use Penny as a way to express something that they've personally held and want to pass on to the next generation, right? So maybe one more thought on this, if it's okay, Sarah. I spend a lot of my time in kind of my work life trying to convince church leaders to change their theology to permit women to speak and to teach. And that's hard work to change a system that's been in place for so long, and, theology that has been there forever, and systems and structures that just keep perpetuating year after year after year. That's a lot of work. And so part of the impetus for writing Penny in the first place was like, maybe let's start younger, so that, over time we have to do less of that sort of mind changing later, and we can change things on the front end. So those are a few additional thoughts.
That's so important. And while you're mentioning that, I think I'll take the opportunity to say this book isn't just for little girls. So, my boys are older, so we're not reading bedtime stories to my 14-year-old, but he reads it to Naomi. And, I think the messaging for boys that little girls can grow up to be preachers is really important too. So if you're listening and you don't have a little girl, get a copy of the book anyway. So in each episode, we invite our guests to respond to a parenting question. And here's today's question for you.
Some families may attend a church that affirms women in leadership, but still have a male pastor who preaches most Sundays, with a woman in the pulpit only once or twice a year. How can a parent expose their kids to a more balanced view of church leadership without leaving their church altogether?
I think a lot about this. So the premise of the question is that the church affirms women in leadership. And I guess I would want to understand more about that. And so to me, that would be asking questions of, where the church's history has been on this. And then maybe particularly how sounds like the lead pastor holds this, right? Is this an issue that's important to that person? Is it something I would want to understand their backstory? So maybe a little bit of like, hey, pastor, can I take you to coffee? And I'd love to just hear kind of where you're coming from, and just trying to understand what he is willing to do, or how closely he holds this issue, and whether it's something he just sort of says, yes, okay, sure, or whether he's got conviction about it and he's willing to do something about it. And if it's the latter, then I think it's a question of like, well, hey, could I put a bug in your ear about having more women preach more often? And would it be, if it's helpful, I'm willing to be a part of like finding women who could come and fill the pulpit when you're not here, or even when you are here. So I think for me, that just, if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's largely about what's going on with that pastor. And is the pastor really on board with this value? And if not, I think the question is then, well, what do you do? How do you get them on board with it? And if they are, then it's like, well, let's think practically about how to express your conviction.
I think too, it's funny because we get this critique of our book a lot where they say, well, I can't believe her parents just left their church. Well, we weren't really saying that they just like left their church, but they went to visit a church. They took her to see a female preacher. But there are, you can visit a church one week that has a great female pastor. We sometimes will stay home on a Sunday morning and do a virtual church with a female pastor just because we support it. And, or if we happen to know like, oh, our friend Lila is preaching at this church this Sunday, let's stay home and watch her virtually. So there are some things that you can do outside of church to support that value as well.
It's great. There's opportunities to expose your kids beyond your local church, but then there's also maybe an opportunity to ask some good questions and exercise some influence at the local church level. So
the other quick thought I have is sometimes we think about leadership in the church. When we think about changing the church and opening the doors for women to preach, it is at the pastor pulpit level. But there are other places in the church where people can influence. And so I think maybe the other way to go about this would be to try something, maybe not at the upper level if it's not ready for that yet, but try something more at the grassroots kind of level and let change bubble up as opposed to coming from the top down. So I think almost every system I've seen that says women can do things, there's room for that. There's room to exercise leadership, leading a small group or hosting a book club or doing something that has women leading. And then when there's fruit from that, then it's about broadcasting and letting the church know that there's fruit happening. And so then change bubbles up that way. So it's not always, I think we think of change often as top down, but it can be bottom up as well.
That's great. Thank you. It's a question I'm sure many of you listeners listening may have a very similar question. So, well, Penny Preaches is available wherever books are sold, and you can find out more about the Dixons and their work at Dr. Rob Dixon, that's drrobdixon.com, and amydixonbooks.com. So thanks so much for being with us today, Amy and Rob. And I'm wondering if one of you would be willing to pray for our listeners as we close.
Let me pray for us. Lord, it's great to be on this call. I just bless Sarah and the work of this podcast and all the things that are happening around it. And I do pray, God, that you would help us as parents in particular to know how to navigate achievement culture, that you would give us convictions about when to push back against achievement culture and how to help our kids navigate it in a way that affirms who they are, not what they do. That in a way that produces whole people and not just people that know how to do something or succeed in a certain way. So just give us courage and give us faith to navigate that as we go. And I do pray for grace and peace for all the parents out there. It is not easy to be a parent. And so we pray, God, that you would meet us in that most important task of raising up the next generation and be with us in that. Give us what we need to be successful. And so in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. And now it's time for Steal This Idea, a simple, practical way to take today's conversation and live it out at home. Try it, tweak it, make it your own. The goal is not to replicate exactly what I do with my family, but to practice the beautifully distinct and compelling way of Jesus with yours. When I was a kid, Saturday nights in my house included a significant ritual. Around the dinner table, after we finished eating, each of us would take turns sitting in the hot seat. But this wasn't for being grilled or for being corrected. It was to receive blessing. My sister and I, and my mom and dad, would take turns receiving words of blessing from the rest of the family. Not praise for something we had done, not recognition for an achievement, but words that spoke to who we were, our character, our personality, the deep and good things that made us us and reflected the image of God. My parents did this because they believed too many kids grew up without ever hearing their parents, especially their fathers, speak words of blessing over them, and they wanted to do something different with us. There's an art to blessing, and it's easy to confuse it with praise. So praise says, you did a great job on that drawing. Blessing says, you are so creative, and that's a way you image God. Praise says, I'm so proud of you for the way you treated your brother today. And there's nothing wrong with praise. We should praise our kids, but if our kids only hear praise about the things they do without also hearing blessing about who they are, it can result in a learned connection between achievement and affirmation or love, which is a hallmark of achievement culture that I explored with the Dixons today. So while praise affirms the behavior of treating their brother well, blessing says, you are kind, and that reminds me of God. So one is about what we do, the other is about who we are. This practice doesn't take long, just a few words for each family member, spoken over them like a gift. And if you have little ones who aren't yet able to speak, they just sit there and receive. Looking back, I can see how this practice shaped me, not just in hearing words of blessing spoken over me week after week, but also in learning to give those words, even when I didn't necessarily feel like saying kind words to my sister. So steal this idea. Try it with your family, whether it's around the dinner table like my family or just before bed or some other time. Take a few moments to name what is true and good in one another. You can learn more about this practice on my website, listed in the show notes. I hope you'll give it a try. The Teach Your Children Well podcast is a production of InterVarsity Press. For more information on any IVP titles mentioned in this episode, visit ivpress.com and use code IVPTEACH25. That's IVPTEACH25 for 25% off and free U.S. shipping. Sound engineering by Honest Podcasts. Our producers are Helen Lee, Caitlin Borick, and Travis Albritton. I'm your host, Sarah Cowan Johnson. Don't forget to subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the IVP YouTube channel, and leave a rating and review to support the show.